about 20% of the equipment will generate about 80% of the total harmonic content in a plant. But, this equipment is very expensive. Hi, I'm Eric from Alpha Power Solutions. Today I would like to elaborate a little bit about harmonic distortion and why it requires professional testing. The most common symptoms of elevated harmonic levels are typically overheating transformers, overheating distribution cables, circuit breakers tripping for no apparent reason, protection fuses blowing for no apparent reason, just like the circuit breakers. They would blow, you would replace the fuse and everything would continue working. But most commonly would be the premature failure of electrical and electronic. That's typically a telltale sign that there is something wrong, that the harmonics are elevated in the distribution network of the client, and that needs to be looked into. But premature failures are typically the telltale sign. So the traditional test equipment that electrical personnel is issued with in most factories or plants is multimeter type equipment that will do 99% of all the measurements that the electrician would need to do. But this equipment can typically not measure harmonics. You need more sophisticated and expensive test equipment such as power analyzers and power quality analyzers. So unless you're really in the field where you need to measure harmonics, it actually is quite difficult to justify the purchase, the investment required to buy this equipment to be able to measure the harmonics. But that's just one aspect of it. Once you have measured them, you need to be able to interpret the data to find out whether you have a problem or not. So that's why most electrical personnel doesn't get issued with this type of equipment. The problem with harmonic filtration equipment is that it is rather expensive. It's a significant investment, and you need to be sure that you can quantify the problem and then identify the solution for the problem being experienced. It requires not just test equipment, but knowledge about tracing the sources of these harmonics so that the key culprits or the key contributors to the elevated harmonics in the system are identified. And as usual, the 80-20 rule applies, is that about 20% of the equipment will generate about 80% of the total harmonic content in a plant. So it is really, really important to have the right test equipment and the knowledge to identify the right solution. If you take a guess and you just say, well, I'll try this, the chances are that your intervention is insufficient and you don't solve the problem, or it's too large and then you've done an excessive investment and these costs run up very, very quickly. There's also a thing that you another aspect that you need to understand is that you mustn't try to chase perfection where you eliminate all the harmonics in your system. Up to a certain level, they're absolutely harmless. And that's why there is standards available in Europe, America, even in South Africa, where, it's prescribed up to what level equipment is allowed to generate harmonics. So the trick is not to chase the perfection. The trick is to find the hotspots, the key components that generate most of the harmonics, and just tackling them. And you would rather involve a company that has power factor correction as its core business to help identify these solutions, because like I said, investments are significant, and if you get it wrong, it could be a huge waste of money. In order to be able to do a harmonic analysis, you need a power quality analyzer, a data logger, whatever you want to call it, that has a sampling rate of at least 20 kilohertz. For most applications, that's good enough. But if the customer has super harmonics or supra harmonics, in levels that are destructive, you actually have to go for a much higher sampling rate. We typically use loggers for those applications, with loggers with a sampling rate of above 409 kilohertz. So these machines, these recorders, gather tremendous amounts of data. And life is made a little bit easy by the manufacturers of those, because they basically provide software that actually analyzes this amount of data and actually provides or visualizes you the problems so that you can easily identify the solution. So that's the beauty of the modern equipment that is available on the market. But this equipment is very expensive, this test equipment. So it's, unless you're in this business, it actually is very tough investment to justify if you're only going to use it once or twice a year. One of our customers who is in the printing business, high-tech printing business, high-speed printing, approached us because he was having a tremendous problem with failure of very expensive electronic boards that make up, the design of these printing machines. Typically when a card would go, they would have the cost of these replacement cards like in excess of 400,000 rand. So each failure is a major setback for the company. So we were called in to identify, what the problem was. We identified, we put our logos on, identified that the harmonics were elevated. We installed a filtration system, a number of filtration systems for approximately 750,000 rand. The client hasn't incurred any failures since then. Now, I'm not saying that he's not going to have any more card failures. It's just that he had lots of problems before. And since we installed the system, there is no more failures of these cards. So the client's very happy. But I did explain to the client at the time is that, by the time we installed our filtration systems, the harmonics that exist in the system had already starting, I would say maybe affecting these boards and weakening some of their components in the process. We always try to temper the expectation of the customers and say, well, once we install a harmonic filtration system, it doesn't mean that all your problems are going to disappear overnight, but the frequency of the problems will, reduce significantly in the months after the interview. That's, of course, under the assumption that, the harmonics were elevated at the time and that they were definitely a major contributor to the failure of these electronic boards because we did the measurements and we could identify that. Well, thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. There'll be a blog link in the description below.